Good evening, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to Creative Conversations. I'm Stephanie Gillart. I'm the producing artistic director and CEO at American Stage, and I'm so grateful that you've joined my conversation tonight. I'm hoping that you'll be sending some questions my way because the conversation is between us this evening, and I'm looking forward to hearing what's on your mind as I share what's on my mind. Creative Conversations is an opportunity for us to spend a short period of time just kind of sharing what some of the really key concerns and thoughts are around our industry, around the American Stage specifically, and around what's happening in the performing arts right now, today. And Jared will show us kind of what we've been talking about and a little bit about where we're going from here with Creative Conversations. This is our third Creative Conversation. If you've missed the first couple of weeks staging a creative comeback with John Collins from the St. Pete Arts Council on June 8th, that is the recording of that is on our website and on our YouTube channel. A City of the Arts, last week we talked with Chris Steinecker about the arts as part of the business community in St. Pete. And that also is on our website and on our YouTube channel if you missed it. Tonight, we're talking about anti-racism in practice. Next week, we're going to be talking about a safe return to the theater for performers. So looking at tonight's conversation, anti-racism in practice, this was actually not the initial, and we'll go ahead and bring the slide down for a moment, Jared, if you will, because I want to just kind of address some the reason for the conversation tonight and really kind of try to create some context and acknowledge that this wasn't originally even planned to be part of the creative conversation. This conversation tonight has been prompted by what's going on in the world around us. And truly, as our nation has been brought to a reckoning over racial injustices that are perpetually systemic and undeniable around us. The arts industry and theater in particular are really being held to account for our role in continuing a system of inequity and lack of representation. And it's something that internally is really led us to ask some difficult questions, some important questions, challenging, humbling questions in a real effort to try and understand our role, our complicity, our where we have had good intentions but not found those good intentions to be manifested in real change and real actions, and to really ask ourselves, what does solidarity look like? Solidarity with our community, and it's a really important time right now, as our industry has already taken a significant hit, and we're really kind of dismantling right now what it is to be a professional live theater amid a pandemic. This is an important time to evaluate all of that, which how we function and what we bring to our communities and our responsibility in how we are serving our communities. And so today is a very humble, vulnerable, honest, messy beginning of a conversation to talk about where we go from here, and first to kind of do take a moment to talk about where we've been and why we're where we are right now. Again, this is scratching the surface, and you know, I mentioned my guests that I've had on the Creative Conversations the last 2 weeks, and tonight it's just me. And why is this white woman here in front of you to talk about anti-racism? When I decided to cover this topic and start the dialogue in this forum, I immediately started to think about who to have on as my guest, and the conversation. Have been having a lot of private conversations in my own effort to kind of understand and deepen my own empathy and awareness and understand my own blind spots. Have been really thinking about who should come on and speak with me about anti-racism. And as I thought about it, and in my conversations with friends and artists and colleagues and peers of color, it really occurred to me that right now, it is not their job to come and help me understand the things that are kind of right in front of me. and are right in front of us. And with all of the resources that are out there, all of the information that is out there, it's my job right now as the leader of American Stage to take more time and bring more intention to understanding our role in the lack of equity and diversity that we find ourselves continuing to experience in the theater industry. I've been in this field my entire adult life. I love this work. We are an industry built of some of the most compassionate, empathetic people you will meet, and yet undeniably, we are a white industry. And I realized that tonight I needed to say that and to recognize that I'm so proud to be the CEO and producing artistic director at American Stage. I think it's an exceptional organization. I think its history is something to be proud of. I think its role in the community is something that is honorable, and there is tremendously good intention and really valued partnerships. But I also have to tell you that in our 43 years, we have never had a person of color in any leadership position at American Stage. Why is that? I'm not going to be able to answer that in its entirety tonight. That's not what I'm going to attempt to do. First, just have to acknowledge that that's a fact. And if we don't have any people of color in leadership in our businesses and our arts institutions and our organizations, how can we begin to think that we are representing our communities? So when the movement, the more recent movement happened, and there was such a need and a desire on behalf of so many of us to say something and to contribute to the movement in a way that made it clear where we stand. And American Stage at that time put this statement out. Jared, if you go ahead to that slide. So American Stage condemns racism, hatred, and injustice and affirms unequivocally that Black lives matter. We are deeply disturbed by the continued assaults of bigotry and senseless violence perpetrated against Black individuals in America. We know too that we must do better and we must do more to be accountable in our role in challenging systemic and insidious racism. Change has been too slow. We must demand more of ourselves and of one another as we strive to make a positive impact in cultivating a society where love and respect and opportunity are not offered on condition of the color of one's skin. American Stage is committed to listening, to learning, and to acting in support of a more just world. Those words are, that's the statement. And words are pretty cheap, and they're easy, relatively easy to string together to make some of us feel better about what we've done and what we've accomplished and how we're contributing. I'm highly aware right now that those are just words until we have actually made change happen. So I wanted tonight just touch briefly, and as I'm talking, I really want to make time for questions that you have. So please, as I'm going through this, any questions, comments, that you have, please type them into the chat box there, and toward the latter part of the conversation, we'll get to your questions, and I really want to hear what you're thinking. So that first part of that last sentence, we are committed to listening, and I want to share this quote here on this next slide, Jared, if you would. This is from Kelvin Dinkins Jr. and Al Hartley from HowlRound's We Don't Want Your Statements. If theaters want to earn the trust and attention of us and our BIPOC colleagues, they will need to do more than make a statement. They will need to change. They will need to act. But first, they will need to listen. So what does that mean and what does that look like? We can't just stay in listening mode. Obviously, action is needed here. As I've said, things have moved too slowly, but I think one of the things that has gotten in our way of finding opportunities to make progress happen in a more meaningful, more fully realized way is that we get an idea, we have good intentions, and we move forward without fully listening and understanding why the problem exists. So when we look at why aren't our audiences more diverse, and why have they not become more diverse over the years? For years and years and years, we've been talking about this, and yet there's been little change, not just at American Stage, but throughout our industry. Why is it that we haven't had a person of color in any of our leadership positions. It's not because we haven't had the conversation, but we haven't done it. It hasn't happened. Why is it that we have offstage, backstage, behind the scenes, our design teams are mostly people, white faces? We think we know the answers to these things, and so we do what we think we need to do to address it, but without fully understanding what's going on and why that's the case. How can we really come up with solutions that are meaningful? And what are we doing? The question I keep thinking about is, how do we know we're creating an environment where people who don't look like most of the rest of us who are there at the theater feel like they belong? How can we possibly know the answer to that if we don't ask? So listening. The next part of the statement talks about learning, and I want to share this, this quote here, Jared, if you would share the next slide. For white people in America, it is up to each of us to first listen, then we must seek greater knowledge about our country's deeply rooted racism. It is an undue burden on our colleagues and friends of color to teach us about racism and do the mental work for us. Julia Wench says this in Antiracism Resources for White People, which, by the way, has some really great resources. And at the end of this this discussion, we're going to share those resources with you. That's the part about us doing our homework and not just not failing to talk to our friends, colleagues, peers of color, but not expecting them to do all of that work and do the heavy lifting. The work, the information is out there, the resources are out there. And I think that these go on a parallel path, asking for insights from those we know in terms of what their experiences are, but also doing our own study of history and of what's going on and looking at the statistics and looking at the data that's out there to help us better understand where the problems really are, and what we've already been told that we haven't maybe stopped and fully listened to or taken in a way that's really allowed us to absorb the lessons that have been provided to us over many, 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 many years. So that's the learning part. And for me right now, that's, again, there's so much out there right now. And I think that I'm a little bit embarrassed that someone who has considered herself to be an aware, conscious white person who really cares about equity and diversity, who understands and is sensitive to bias, how much I still have to learn about where it shows up and what it really looks like. And understanding what my limitations are inside of how much I can come up with an idea, a plan, a strategy without having lived the experience that I'm trying to I'm trying to address. So much more learning to be done in this process. The last part is the crucial part, of course, which is to act on what we've learned. And this quote about what is anti-racism, and I thought this, really is kind of perfect, and it's so helpful. And I'm going to continue to use this to come back to. Anti-racism is the active process of identifying and eliminating racism by changing systems, organizational structures, policies, and practices and attitudes, so the power is redistributed and shared equitably. The thing that is so important about that, and the reason that the word anti-racism is so important, is because it is not enough to simply not be racist or think you are not a racist. Because in order to overcome racism, in order to actually bring about equity and really allow our culture and our economy and indeed our just very quality of life to benefit from the wonderful diversity that our country, our society has all around us, we have to not just not engage in racist behaviors ourselves. That's not near enough. We have to break down systems and communications and processes and old ways of doing things that are built around racist structures, racist mindsets. And that means being an advocate, and that means not being afraid to speak up. And while I have always tried to do the right thing when I have been aware of it, I know there are times when I have not spoken up, when I have not gone the extra mile, when I have not put in the extra time that it would have taken to truly be able to say, I'm an anti-racist. And I'm, as much as it sounds like I'm focused on what has been wrong and what's gone wrong and what we haven't done right, I'm actually really inspired by this moment. And I ultimately want to impart that, that this is such an opportunity. There is no place, I think, better prepared to take on the challenge of deconstructing racism in our society than our arts and culture institutions. And it is just and it is right that we are being held to account in the way that we are. And I've heard some people say, gosh, I think of arts organizations as being the one of the last places where racism is an issue or where these issues need to be addressed. And if you think about it and you look around and you see the people who engage in the arts and who have a real voice in what happens in our arts institutions, you realize that that's not true. And we all have to recognize that what our arts organizations are doing, and particularly in the theater, and this is true as well in cinema and other mediums where storytelling is the way in which a community in our world and our society comes to understand ourselves. And it impacts the way we see ourselves, what we see on stage, the stories we see and the stories we tell, and the people around which we experience those stories with have a direct impact on the way we see ourselves and the way we see our community. And if we are telling stories, even if we are telling stories that seem to represent cultures that are different from our own, if we're just sitting with mostly white people in an audience and having that experience among ourselves, how can we truly say that we are becoming a more empathetic, more integrated community? It's one of the things that I think about a lot and have long before these recent days. All of these topics are things that I've thought about before, but the fact that there's not an easy answer has perhaps at sometimes made it been a convenient way of focusing on other things and going after initiatives and strategies and getting things done that feel a little less intimidating or overwhelming. So I'm excited by this opportunity right now. I'm glad that our industry is being held to account. It's a little scary. It feels a little unnerving because we want to get it right and we want to do the right thing. And it's inevitable that there will be some mistakes and there will be some continued mistakes and I'll say things the wrong way or overlook something, and it's not going to be a perfect journey to move us forward. But as I said, what better time than right now to be having this conversation in a way that we've never really had it before. And I want you to be a part of that conversation. I know there's some questions out there, which I'm going to get to in just a moment. I do want to, while we before we get into the questions, just flash up on the screen, if you would, for a moment, a couple of resources that I want to share. These are some places you can go. That change.org Pledge for Diversity is very specific to our industry. It's a pledge that I've signed on behalf of American Stage that's really goes directly to how in action, what actions we can commit to be a more anti-racist professional theater company. And there are pledges in there for audiences as well, and for our creative teams, our teaching artists. It's really about how we create our board of directors, how we create an entire system process that we take every aspect of what we do, and we look at where we can make a difference and where we can make changes, small and large, to be a more integrated organization that really represents our community, because that's the goal ultimately, is to be an organization that truly everyone in our community belongs, everyone in our community has a voice. HowlRound, we don't want your statements, American Theater. That's that first quote that I mentioned about listening, comes from that. And it's really about, there's a lot of good intentions and a lot of good words being put out there. Gee, tonight's webinar is a well-intended statement in its own right. It's not enough. And understanding that's just a beginning. And being able to talk about this messy stuff, this stuff that makes us feel a little bit uncomfortable and risk saying something that's going to upset people, that's a part of it. Allowing ourselves to be a little uncomfortable is a necessary part of it. but moving past that is what's truly the essential next step. Resources for white people to learn and talk about race and racism. Great resource on Fractured Atlas. Fractured Atlas is a great website, and they have some really fantastic resources. How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram X. Kendi, who does tremendous research on anti-racism in America. And then the book White Fragility, many of you are familiar with this book by Robin J. DiAngelo, and it's a highly recommended book about fear and white privilege, and it's not something for us to be afraid of, to feel guilty about. It's something for us to just kind of allow us to open our eyes. And the last thing I want to say before opening it up to questions is really just to share this quote from Nelson Mandela. Because when we talk about privilege and we talk about what it is to be afraid to give up what we have, and maybe the guilt that comes around that, to be free is not merely to cast off one's chains, but to live in a way that respects and enhances the freedom of others. And I can't think of a more beautiful way to live your life than to be committed to respecting and enhancing the freedom of others. It sounds so simple. And what could possibly be controversial about that? It's not simple because of our history, and because of the unconscious part of the behaviors and systems that we have in place. So we have to be deliberate and we have to be conscious, but it's in this direction of something that is truly inspirational and will lead us to a better world, a world where we are enhancing one another's freedom and respect, and thereby really freeing ourselves up as well. I do believe that. I know that there's a bunch of questions and I talked past my time. Please, Kristen, go ahead and chime in and let me know what thoughts and questions are coming up out there.
Sure, Steph. There's a couple of questions that are.
We can't hear you. I think you might be muted.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Oh,
can you hear me now?
You're muted. I've got you muted. Hold on a second. I can't hear you. Okay.
Should be able to hear me now, Steph.
I can hear you now.
Great. So there's a couple of questions that are around diverse talent on the stage. So one question in particularly is about how many people of color come into the audition room, and if these numbers are low, how can we increase those numbers? And also a comment about the National Theatre of London having a very diverse set of artists in their casts, and how are they able to accomplish that?
Well, I can't say exactly why in London and the UK and abroad in general they're able to accomplish that. Other than I think in general the theater is a more inclusive experience. I think that people when you go to the theater in London, for example, you see people much more diverse audiences. So people are making theater part of their lives. And I think that that's because they feel like theater is for them. I think in the U.S. we have struggled to make the theater feel like a place that is for everyone. And so if you do not see yourself reflected in a community, you're less likely to try and engage and participate in that community. As it relates to, and I want to make sure we've got time for other questions, but as it relates to casting, we really do try to make it very clear that we, for all of our hiring and with our casting, really encourage people of color that we're interested in non-traditional casting, but we have to take more time and reach out and develop relationships and do more than just a posting. And we do that. And much of our casting over the years has been reliant and casting people of color has been reliant on not just the general practices and processes of putting audition information out there, but really building relationships and reaching out and going above and beyond what would be a typical industry process. And more of that is what we need in all aspects of our hiring.
Thank you. Thanks, Steph. There's another question that's in regards to your comment about there not having been a senior leadership position, a person of color in a senior leadership position, and about through your experience in your position, what are some of the ways that you think American Stage can change that, as well as other theater companies?
I'm going to go back to the answer I just gave, which is when there is a position open, more time needs to be dedicated to being thoughtful about that. And this is something I've really been thinking about these last few weeks is, when you have an intention, this is true about anything in life, any goal you have or good intention you have, if you don't attach a really specific measurement of what that goal looks like in execution, and then attach to it a plan, a timeline, and some kind of accountability, the likelihood of you being successful is low. And that's the work we haven't done. We've talked about it. We have the conversations. We have the good intentions. We make some phone calls, but we haven't held ourselves accountable by creating a specific measurable plan of this is what success looks like on this front. And that's where we're headed next. And that's what will be required, because when you have that, then you start to find the solutions. You start to find the strategies that you hadn't thought of before.
Great. There is a question regarding characters in the greater canon. This is in reference specifically to Hattie McDaniel's role in Gone with the Wind, and the fact that she won an Oscar for playing a slave role, right? So the question is about how do we examine those roles of people of color, Black people playing slaves in stories? How do we exclude them, or do we change them? Do we leave them as written?
That is such a good question. One of the things that has been coming up in conversation around this issue, it's not directly on point with what you're saying, but I think it relates, is oftentimes theaters, and American Stage included, produce plays that are coming from the Black experience, and they are plays that are dealing with the tragedies of the Black experience. And we ask these performers to come in, we just kind of expect them to come in and enact these tragedies, and a lot of these actors are being asked to do it again and again and again and again, where other actors may be having the chance to perform all sorts of different kinds of styles and all sorts of different kinds of characters. And so that's something that I'm thinking about in a different way as it relates to the actors who we already work with, the actors of color who we already work with, and really just asking them the questions and understanding more and being more thoughtful about what are the assumptions that I'm making or the things that I'm overlooking. One of the things that we've started to adopt recently, and this will be something we do more and more and find more places where this is applicable, is to bring in a consultant. When we're working on a piece where the artists in the room need to be supported by somebody who has some level of expertise on the experience. And I think that will help us determine where work that we're doing is help us to bridge a gap and create a vocabulary, and certainly looking at continuing to really think about and not just make decisions since as a white woman, of course, what lens I can bring is limited, and that's true of all of the choices that I make artistically. So that's where I really need to continue to expand my circle of creative cohorts to ask questions and get input on the creative choices that we're making.
Great, thanks, Steph. I think we have time for one more. This question is about diversity in the audience, and the question comes from Susan, and she's wondering what steps has American Stage considered to increase diversity in our audience, and wondering sort of what is the approach there? Have people of color in the community been invited, and have they visited?
Well, yes. What I'd like to do is to say, just to kind of give a cursory kind of, there are a number of things we have done, but I'd rather focus on what we haven't done, because I think because clearly what we've done is not enough. It's something that, we'll say we talk about all the time, and it's talked about within our industry. It's not just an American Stage problem. It's a theater problem. So yes, we, of course, looking at what are the stories that we're telling, and are they relatable, and how, if we're telling a story that's not specifically a story about a family of color, how are we bringing in characters of color in other stories as well? And we've got more to do on that front, but having the lives of our audiences members reflected back to them is essential. But when we've done that, we've not necessarily, and going into communities and putting programs and going into other communities with programs for young people to try and develop an interest in theater from a young age. There are a lot of different strategies and a lot of different things that we have done. And as I said, it's not been enough. And this is where I want to, rather than tell you what the answer is and what we need to do next, I need to understand more why. Why and what else? What's going to, what we need to do? What can we do to make the theater feel like a place that people of color feel like this is for them as well. They feel comfortable there, not just because of the story that's on the stage, but the experience in and of itself. And I can't answer that because I haven't really had the courage to directly ask it. I've wondered it, I've made assumptions about it, but I haven't asked people of color specifically, what would make you feel more like you belong at the theater? And that's something that we're going to do. We should have done a long time ago.
Great, thank you. The last couple of comments that we had are around the idea of having dialogue with people of color and non-whites, and this idea of not being an artist chatting in a silo, and making sure that we're engaging outside of those silos. So, are there any plans to have engaging conversations with people of color regarding programming at American Stage or anything of that nature?
Yeah, it's a good question. So one of the things that I'm working with the board on, the board is very engaged and very much prioritizing this topic, led by Robin Signolo, our chair. We really have been on the phone regularly talking about the wake up call that we're both getting right now. We are going to be putting together a this is early days, so I don't want to give too much information as we're still trying to understand what's going to be most effective, but making sure that we're pulling together bringing together a diverse group of people from not just artists and not just audiences, but professionals, members of our community, artists, staff, audience members, professionals outside of our community, and really give them a safe kind of space to give us some honest opinions and assessments with some really clear attached goals. So this isn't just a matter of, we just want your opinion and then we'll think about it, but we really want to be thoughtful about this. And while we feel there's an urgency to it, we also feel that it's essential to take the time to understand what we're going to do with the information, because dang it, don't ask somebody their opinion, ask them what they think you need to do unless you're really prepared to do something with that information. And that's what we're working on right now. And there will be movement. We will continue this conversation. This is just scratching the surface. And as I said, there's a lot of work in front of us, but it's an inspiring time, and we're not going to do this in a silo, and we're not going to do this by assuming that the ways we've approached it in the past are enough. Thank you for being here for this conversation tonight, and I welcome any follow-up questions to anything that's been talked about tonight. But I also want to say that there will be more conversations going forward, and they won't all come from me and from my voice, because ultimately part of the next part of the process is hearing from other perspectives. And I'm looking forward to that phase of how we move forward, how we really come together and learn. And that listen, learn, act, that will be an ongoing cycle. So there are actions we can take right away. The listening and the learning will be ongoing, and actions will happen as we continue that process. So this has been a slow moving train up to now, and it's time to get it going at a tempo that's more commensurate with what we have in our hearts, which is a desire to bring everybody together at American Stage. Thank you all so much for joining me tonight.